everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Well, Tony, the 3 minutes immediately leading up to the start of the show ended with me looking up the box score for the 1984 Louisville versus Houston college football game. So this is definitely going to be one of the podcasts we have done. We will sometimes wander a little bit. This one, we hadn't even started and we're already like, why am I even looking at this?
Yeah, even Jack Park would be like, guys, come on, move on. Do we need this kind of minutia? No, we don't. But the reason for this show, obviously, is because we have to fulfill a contractual obligation. But we're going to talk about the transfers. But then on Thursday morning, a crystal ball from 24/7's Steve Wiltfong came in for Birmingham, Alabama 5-star cornerback Naeem Offord in the 2025 class. Crystal ball for Ohio State. Depending on the outlet, the recruiting service, he's either the number 1 or number 2 cornerback in the 2025 class. And the other number 1 or number 2 cornerback on those services is Devin Sanchez, who is committed to Ohio State. Offord, I believe, is visiting this weekend for Ohio State. So generally when Steve Wiltfong throws in a crystal ball, it's because something is imminent. And Tom, I got to tell you, if a commitment comes and this happens and Tim Walton lands another one, granted, you've got to hold on to him for a very long time. But is it time, Tom, to start having a conversation about Brian Hartline and maybe, you're not the king of Columbus anymore?
I don't think you're allowed to say that phrase on this podcast. Sorry.
I'm sorry. You're right.
That may be spoken for elsewhere in the city. But I think if you bring in, you got to remember, we're talking about the number 1 and number 2 corners in the class. They're also considered a strong favorite to land the number 4 corner in the class, Dorian Brew. They already have the number 10 corner in the class, Blake Woodby. So that's now 4 of the 10. Also, the number 6 corner in the class, Jonte Gilbert, was committed to Ohio State at one point. So now you've got literally half of the top 10 corners in the class in the 247 composite, either committed, formally committed, or projected to be committed to Ohio State in one class. I know Brian Hartline has been the gold standard of recruiting at Ohio State for basically as long as Brian Hartline has been at Ohio State. But if you bring in the 4 top corners in the class, oh, and by the way, they're also pretty in heavily after the number 1 safety in the class as well. At some point, is Tim Walton the Brian Hartline of the defense is Brian Hartline the Tim Walton of the offense? I don't think we're there yet, but you can sort of see it from here.
Well, especially the way Caleb Downs talks about Tim Walton's impact on his decision to come to Ohio State. But that crop of corners, and I'm not even sure if you mentioned the safety situation with Trey McNutt, Buckeye legacy, who is the number 4 safety in the nation, I believe, in the 24/7 composite, a number 25 player, I believe. So there are a number of pretty good options out there. Actually, I'm looking right now. We mentioned Fahim Delane, the number 1 safety, according to some outlets as well. And he recently came out and said it's the top 2 of Oregon and Ohio State. So you're seeing Ohio State involved with a bunch of guys. Now the question is, what happens if the worst possible scenario? What happens if you get them all? Can you find a place for them? And we always talk about on the show, Tom, that you sign as many defensive backs as you can, because in this defense, a lot of them can play. And if you're talking about if you get the top 2 corners, then it's like, well, what about Dorian Brew? Dorian Brew, of course, formerly from Clayton Northmont, moves to Texas, but still is a Buckeye legacy track-wise. His mother, I believe, is that situation. But I also know that Mark Givler believes he's probably a safety at the next level, but he's also a big 6'2", 6'3" guy like Devin Sanchez. Trey McNutt has corner skills, probably ends up at safety. And we know Blake Woodby is looking at him as a slot guy and the nickel. So there are ways to maneuver things. Not everybody's going to work out, but also you've got to convince everybody that there is a place for them if they choose to come aboard.
And I think that's kind of a challenge in a lot of places with Ohio State, that you're coming in and, sometimes guys don't recognize it until they get there, but, you get there and then, who was it? One of the offensive linemen talking about and then my first practice, I had to block Nick Bosa. And it was like, what am I doing here? And
Josh Myers.
Josh Myers, that's right. There is not a, super clear path to the playing field for any true freshman coming in. I mean, even Jeremiah Smith, number one player in his class, coming in overall, not just number one wide receiver, number one player in his class. And there's not a clear path to the playing field for Jeremiah Smith this year. They have Brandon Inniss, they have Cardinal Tate, they have Emeka Ibuka. They've got a very talented room. I'm sure he's going to play, but he's not necessarily a day one starter. I think you can sell the opportunity for playing time year one, year two, because I think all you have to do is you have to point to, look, Denzel Burke was a day one starter. You can be a day one starter corner if you're good enough. And if you are a player at this level, guess what? You probably think you are potentially good enough to do that. Not everyone can do that. Malik Hartford played as a true freshman at safety. Like, they can point to, if you are good enough, there is a path to the field for you. Not everyone is going to do that, and that's okay. You can start just your second year and still turn out to be a pretty darn good player. You could start just your third year and become a pretty darn good player. But there is a path. It's not, this is not the 1970s where you have to sit out and you can't play as a true freshman. I guess it was like 1960s. You can definitely find a role on this team. And as far as how many years too many, I think, what you said is true. You get as many as you can. And, they're not signed until they're signed. And especially guys from other parts of the country are not signed until they're signed. And also, the way roster management has changed just in the last year or two. It used to be, you lots of teams were at 93 this time of year, 95 this time of year. Now there's a lot of teams with as many guys go in the portal as have been recently. A lot of teams are below 85 right now, and you're looking to bring in more. So as much depth as you can add, you add it, and you keep, you can't sign 52 guys in a class like Ole Miss used to, but if you sign, they have still not had the class with 28, 29 guys, and at some point you figure that's going to happen.
You just got me thinking now, back when Houston Nutt, and I don't remember which year it was, when he signed 39 guys. Imagine if there are no constrictions on what he could do today in terms of you're going to lose 30 guys a year from all kinds of attrition. How many would he have to bring in every year just to account for all of the guys that are leaving and the way he would love to oversign? I mean, are we talking like a class of 55 or 60 players like every year for that guy? And would be fascinating to watch. It would be worthy of a Netflix series. It would be a disaster as well, which is why we would want to watch it. But Trey McNutt, Shaker Heights, Ohio, he is the number 2 safety in the 24/7 composite. Fahim Delane, who I mentioned earlier, was at Ohio State and Oregon, in his top 2 from Our Lady Good Counsel in Olney, Maryland, which is a place that has sent Ohio State some players before. Would not be a bad haul to get the top 2 corners in the class, the top 2 safeties in the class, and also the number 10 corner and maybe the number 4 corner as well. But if they were to, let's flip back to Naeem Offord, the number 1 or number 2 corner out of Alabama, Tom. We were talking before the show that Alabama is not necessarily a place that Ohio State has ever been successful getting a player. And Alabama has been a very productive high school proving ground and has thrown, like every year there are 5-star guys coming out of Alabama, especially I'm going to assume the Birmingham area, which is where Offord is from. But Tom, tell us how long it has been since Ohio State has signed somebody from Alabama, not counting Quinshon Judkins right now. How long has it been since they brought in a high school recruit from Alabama?
So the last time that I could find, I used to do this as a recurring article every year, and I should probably bring it back because it's been a couple of years. but I used to do this as a recurring article every year. When was who was the most recent Buckeye from each of the 50 states? And there's certain states where they've never had a player. Alabama was one of the ones where I had to dig back the furthest. And the last time I could find a scholarship player listed in the media guide was Dante Wheat in 1981. And when I tweeted this out about 5 years ago now, I tweeted, and Vaughn Broadnax, who was a fullback on the 1981 team, said, "Who is Dante Wheat from 1981?" Which made me think, I wonder who Dante Wheat is from 1981. And the only record of Dante Wheat in 1981 is in the media guide for 1981, where he has a very brief bio with, like a paragraph, just like the rest of the true freshmen. And it says, Montgomery, Alabama did not come into his own in football until his senior year, something of an unknown. And then it kind of goes on from there. And in terms of being something of an unknown, Dante Wheat is an All-American in terms of being something of an unknown, because he apparently never actually enrolled at Ohio State. I found records of him later playing at Louisville, and he played at Louisville for several years as a nose guard. But according to Vaughn Broadnax, he never came to OSU. So that's an interesting thing. And I went back later to see if I could find, was there a previous, was there a guy in the 70s or something like that who was from Alabama? And I don't think I ever found anyone prior to that. So this could be functionally the first real scholarship player that Ohio State has had out of the state of Alabama since ever. So that's, there are not that many states where they have not had guys. That is a pretty rare thing for, they've pulled people out of pretty much everywhere. They had, as of when I did this in 2019, never had someone from North Dakota. They still have not had North Dakota. They have South Dakota on this year's team. No North Dakota, no Vermont, no New Hampshire, no Rhode Island, no New Mexico, no Oregon, no Montana, no I have Colorado on here, but I think no, that's not right. Wyoming and Nebraska. Those were the ones where they've never had a scholarship player. I've got to go back and check that and make sure this is not an exact process. It was just me going through the online PDFs of media guides going back to the 1960s or so. But in terms of recruiting nationally, that's really more of a recent phenomenon. So pulling a kid out of California, there were not a lot of kids out of California or Florida or Georgia on the 1960s or 1970s teams. That's a much more recent phenomenon.
You mentioned maybe you didn't know no player from New Hampshire ever. Your head coach is from New Hampshire, so there is a little coincidence there, some irony, I guess. I wonder, no player from Oregon. I wonder if the move to the Big Ten for Oregon changes that down the road, if that's something where that becomes a byproduct of that. Maybe, I'm not sure that's why the Big Ten is doing this, making this move, but maybe it's to help out Ohio State's recruiting team. All of the push pins in every state, all 50 states for the Buckeyes. The state of Alabama is, as I said, it's picked up steam in terms of the guys that it's producing. In this 2025 class, they have 8 top 100 players from Alabama. The 2024, 8 top 100 players. 2023, 11 top 100 players. And when you have that much talent, and then, of course, there's probably going to be that many 100 to 200 and then 200 to 300, the fact that Ohio State has not been able to get in there tells you, obviously, it's not just Alabama that is getting all of these guys. That South is so difficult. And in Florida, there's just too many to contain. So they're going to get out. Like Alabama, it seems like the fences are built stronger, they're built higher, and you just can't get anybody out of there. I would be interested to go and look over the rest of the Big Ten and see how they have done in recruiting Alabama. I believe Jim Harbaugh, when he was doing the satellite camps and just taking guys that should not be playing in the Big Ten, I think he landed an Alabama running back at one point who was like, the 200th player in the state, something like that. But the Big Ten needs to start opening up these fences. In Ohio State, maybe they're going to be able to get there. But also, Tom, Nick Saban has retired. I'm not sure if you've heard that. And I wonder if this now opens the state to the rest of the nation.
Well, what's interesting is that there's that sort of that belt of the Deep South where it's Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana, and all three of those are places where Ohio State has not pulled a lot of talent out of. The last time they pulled someone out of Louisiana, I think you're counting Jair Brown because he played his high school ball in Cincinnati ultimately. So the last one that I had back in 2019 was Nader Abdallah, who was a defensive tackle on some of those mid-2000s Ohio State teams. Last time they pulled a player out of Mississippi was Craig Robinson in 1990. So that's an area where people are from there. And people who are from there, there's plenty of good football around. You can pull people out of Georgia because like 90% of Atlanta isn't actually from Atlanta. 90% of Atlanta is from, the upper Midwest or the West Coast or the Northeast, and people are moving there, and it's an area that's growing fast. Nashville, Tennessee is like that. Birmingham, Alabama is where people who are from Birmingham, Alabama are. That's you have natives there. It's not, like you talked about Dorian Brew. Dorian Brew's in Texas right now, but his mom was a track star at Ohio State. He went all the way through school in Ohio, and then just moved down there. That's not how Mississippi and Louisiana and Alabama are. And they all have strong in-state schools. And if they don't have a strong in-state school, well, there's a real strong in-state school, one state over or two states over. Athens, Georgia is a lot closer than some of those places. And sure, you could go down there and pull the number 1,536 player in the class and get them to come up. But if you're trying to pull a 5-star guy, the odds historically have been very strong that guy's going to go, if he's from Louisiana, he's probably going to go to LSU. And if he doesn't go to LSU, he's going to go to Alabama. And if he doesn't go to LSU or Alabama, then he's going to go to Texas A&M. And there's so many options down there that it's hard to pull guys out of that particular belt where it's not just a bunch of transplants. You can pull guys out of Florida because no one's from Florida. Everyone's from New York or from Ohio or from wherever, and they've moved down there. That's not true necessarily of Louisiana and Alabama and Mississippi, so they're kind of a different thing in recruiting historically.
I'd be interested to know just how often Ohio State even gets unofficial visits and official visits from Alabama prospects, because it doesn't seem all that often. And you can go up and down when you do go like through the state rankings and like 24/7 or whatever. He's like, oh, that's a good Alabama player. He's, there's Kool-Aid McKinstry. There's this guy. There's that guy. And it's just a litany of names that it would help the rest of the nation as well, not just the South. But so that's the recruiting aspect of the show I wanted to touch on, just because Tim Walton seems to be going crazy. And I guess what this means mostly is that Brian Hartline has to pick it up. And if he doesn't sign Jamie French, something, I'm not saying pack your bags, but you might want to have a go bag ready. That's all. That's just, like, this is one of those things like the rest of the staff is like looking over, like, better pick it up. And what, that's the same thing when you're bringing in the talent. The player's like, well, we better pick it up, which takes me to the transfers, Tom. We got to talk to them this week. And were you as surprised as I was that nobody came in and said I came here for the NIL money? I mean, I was very disappointed in that.
I have heard that that's the only reason that anyone ever comes to Ohio State, and that's any role that NIL plays at Ohio State is very different than the role that it plays at landing the exact same type of prospect in the transfer portal at other prominent Big Ten schools. If you don't believe me, just ask them. Yeah, you look at the guys who are coming in, and the 5 guys that we're talking about here are quarterback Will Howard, safety Caleb Downs, running back Quinshon Judkins, center Seth McLaughlin, and tight end Will Kazmarek. And those are all guys who are coming in with an opportunity to be, at the very least, meaningful contributors on a national championship team. You're going to a program which I just saw a graphic that Ohio State has 5 more first-round draft picks than any other school in NFL history. So you're coming to a school where you have a chance to get developed. You have a chance, both a historical and a recent track record of successful development for the NFL level. And, in terms of being successful on the field, it's not like you have to like lure people out, like spray paint free candy on the side of your rental car while you're out recruiting. Like you just kind of point to, here's the roster. Here's, guess what? I have heard a bunch of national people talk about Ohio State being a clear-cut favorite for the national championship this year. So if you have a chance to get developed and you have a chance to win a national championship, like this doesn't feel like, this is not Miami where it's like, well, you can come down here, we have palm trees and dollar bags with dollar signs on the side of them. Like, yeah, sure. NIL plays a part in pretty much every recruitment right now, but programs like Ohio State or Georgia or Alabama, they've got a lot of other stuff to sell before you have to worry about just like, here's the bag with the dollar sign.
Yeah, and it snowballs. It just becomes more people wanting to be a part of it. And it starts with the juniors deciding to come back. And Will Howard, I thought was interesting talking to him about why Ohio State. First of all, him, I believe, was Will Howard and Quinshon Judkins, when they're both asked why Ohio State, they're like, why not Ohio State? And Howard talking about how his decision, ultimately, he could have gone other places. Ultimately, it came down to the NFL and Ohio State. And the feedback, he was very honest with the feedback that he got from the NFL. He said he was being told between the third and the sixth round, but you never know what to believe when people are telling you this stuff. But he did obviously understand there's more he could do. They said that they wanted to see, the NFL just wanted to see him play more, because this is a guy who's only been the actual starter once, and that was last year, even though he'd started games in 2020, 2021, 2022 as a backup. But getting to play in an offense at Ohio State where he's going to be able to showcase his ability to throw the ball, which he believes very much in, and showcase his arm while also being able to use his legs. I thought he kind of chuckled at the fact that people used to just think of him, see him as a running quarterback. And he's like, guys, I promise you, I can throw the ball.
He could throw the ball. And the other thing that I really liked from his interview, and I played a bunch of clips of those on the morning show for Thursday mornings. If you want to hear directly from Will Howard, you can find that on the Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning podcast. But one of the sound bites in there is him talking about the wide receiver room at Ohio State. And he basically said, like, listen, no disrespect to my guys at K-State. I love my guys at K-State. But, and, you've got Jeremiah Smith, you've got Mecca Ibuka, you've got Carnell Tate, you've got Brandon Innes. You were working with a whole different class of wide receivers at Ohio State. And, one of the things that he needed to do was just put out more film. There's sort of a correlation historically with guys with this many snaps in college are more likely to fail rather than guys who have had, 2,000 more snaps or 1,000 more snaps or whatever the number is. The more snaps you get, the better off you are generally in terms of being prepared to play in the NFL, and the NFL feeling like they have a high degree of confidence that they know what they're getting. It's not just, this guy had 3 good games and he, and then declared, and then it's just sort of what happens when teams adjust to that. And it's like, well, you don't know. So, the opportunity to come back, put more good film out there, play at a high level, and play with really high level teammates. Guess what? Having Carnell Tate, having Emeka Ibuka, having Brandon Innes out there with you, your throw can be a just pretty okay throw, and they can make something really good happen with it. And that's going to make, that's going to put up bigger stats for you. That's going to put up better results for you. You're probably going to win more football games, which is also kind of fun. And so, like he said, why not?
I thought one of the interesting things was when he's talking about the receivers, how he's like, I don't have to go and ask people to come out and throw, like, come catch it. I don't have to pull people out there. Like, they're already out there waiting. Like, they're already out there working. And he's like, oh, cool. That, I don't have to beg people to come work with me because they're already getting work in. And then it's like, yeah, let's do this. And so you've got this kind of similar mindset where everybody's shooting for this goal, and we'll get to Quinshon Judkins in a bit, but he also talked about the goal being greater than yourself, and it's a team-oriented thing. And which takes me to Caleb Downs. I asked him, are you the final piece of the puzzle of this defense? He's like, didn't even want to consider that, but he did say that this defense will be better than last year. He said he expects it to be an elite defense. I thought it was interesting. He talking to like Malik Hartford, Jordan Hancock, and a couple of other guys on the defense, because they had all known each other. Like, as we're learning this, talking to these guys, like, they all know each other, whether it's from camps, social media, Instagram, I call it IG, Tom, but everybody knows each other. They're touching base. Like Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson are friends. It's like a very small world that has gotten smaller and bigger with NIL because people are they're all able to relate to each other in many more ways and reach out to many more people. But I think my number one takeaway from Caleb Downs is that this is a serious dude. Kind of reminds me of Denzel Burke in a way, and how serious he is about his job. And then talks about how he likes to study film and just really learn the defense. He said he's an instinctual player. He can see things before they happen, that sort of thing. I think that was obvious watching him last year. But I asked him, so you like film. Like, do you ever find yourself in your downtime when you're like watching TV or doing something where you're just thinking, you're doing nothing, you're thinking about, I want to go back and watch film, and you have your iPad? He's like, no, I'm a focused person. When I do something, I focus on that, whether I'm watching TV or reading a book. If I'm doing that, I'm only doing that. And I thought that makes tremendous sense for somebody as good as Caleb Downs. Like, I am just focused on this in front of me. I'm not distracted by anything else. My mind is where it's supposed to be.
Well, yeah, that's the old be where your feet are kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like wherever you are, that's what you should be focused on. That's one of those big mantras that you hear coaches and player personnel people talk about all the time. Being instinctual for someone like Caleb Downs, that's one of those things that it's like, okay, well, how do you become more instinctual? And how many times have we talked to quarterbacks over the years where what makes the game slow down? What makes it so that you know what's going to happen before it happens? And it's watching film. It is just watching film and just building up that data bank in your head of here's what's going on and here's what this, when I see this is what that means. And so then it becomes instinctual where you don't have to sit there and think, okay, now when they're in this formation and they motion the slot receiver, what did they tip? You've already seen it. You've had it banged into your head enough times that and then you can just react and just go without having to stop and think about it. That's one of the things that can be a real difference maker. That's one of the things that I think separates these guys, because the reason that all of these guys know each other is because, yeah, it's a big national recruiting industry and there's thousands of players in there. But when you really, the pyramid at the top gets real narrow when you're talking about the Ohio State and Georgia and Alabama level prospects and players. There are only so many of them. They're all going to the same All-American games and the same national camps, and the quarterbacks are all going to the Elite 11. So they're all spending time with each other. They know each other because there's just not that many of those. There are thousands and thousands. I think the stat is that like 7% of high school athletes go on to play in college at any level. That's, Division III, Division II, JUCO, NAIA, whatever. 7%. And this is the 1% of the 1% of the 7%. So there's not that many of them. So it's not a big surprise that they would know each other and have some kind of pre-existing relationships. And I think, both in terms of coaches and players, there's a little bit more of a focus on maintaining those relationships now, because a guy used to go to a different school and was like, well, he's at Alabama and I'm at Ohio State. And so the only chance I would ever see him is if we play them in a bowl game again or at the Senior Bowl. And now I think a lot of those guys are kind of maintaining those relationships, and you keep talking because, you never know.
The relationship aspect of it reminds me of like the East-West Shrine or the Senior Bowl back in the day, when they would get the players would get together from different schools, then they'd spend a week together, and then they'd trade decals, and you'd have Kansas State emblem on an Ohio State helmet. And it was always just one of those things that was the original social media. That was the original IG, Tom. It's Instagram if you're nasty. But that was always cool back then when you have all of these different logos and stuff on the helmets. Quinshon Judkins talking about his decision to come to Ohio State. It was another why not. And that Travion Henderson really, didn't factor into his decision. It was an Ohio State thing. He wanted to come to Ohio State, number of reasons. He did say, yeah, you worry about the tread, obviously. And I think he said in year three, he wanted to be at a place like Ohio State. It's the desire to compete for a national championship. I think it's a nice idea for Ole Miss that you throw to the recruits, but after 2 years, you're like, well, you look at the SEC West and you're like, and if I get out of here, then I get to play Georgia. And it's like, you're asking a lot for Ole Miss. And then you go to Ohio State where you're surrounded by as much talent as you need. Something else that Will Howard said, just the amount of talent that's around you. And we've talked about how Quinshon Judkins and TreVeyon Henderson will mesh. We both have said there's going to be no issues there. And when he told TreVeyon Henderson was excited that he was coming to Ohio State. I think that's, the more you talk to these guys and the more you get answers from them and you see how they're saying things, like, these aren't mercenaries. They're coming for a national championship, but they all say, even Caleb Downs, like, I just want to do whatever I can to help the team. And when Quinshon Judkins was asked, what if there's a game where you only have 10 carries? He's like, I just want to help the team win. And that's all, that's exactly what you would expect to hear. And you can find it, just wash it away as a fairy tale. But I also think a lot of this stuff is getting sussed out by the coaches in terms of they are looking for the right fits. And it sure seems like Quinshon Judkins is another right fit after receiving some thrown rumors out there about how people were unhappy with him at Ole Miss. And he kind of laughed that stuff off as well. But I was pretty impressed with Judkins overall.
Well, I think you're at the point now where you're having a different conversation with guys who are coming in as recruits versus guys who are coming in the transfer portal, especially multi-year starters like Judkins at Ole Miss. When you're coming in as a true freshman, you're selling the possibility of playing time and, here's your path to the field, like we talked about earlier in the defensive back portion of the conversation. With Judkins now coming in, it's like, look, you're good enough to play here. We know you're good enough to play here. We also know that TreVeyon Henderson is a very talented running back. We know that Dallin Hayden is a very talented running back. You've got some talented running backs coming in as true freshmen. You also know what your body feels like after 12 games and 200 and whatever carries at Ole Miss. It does not feel great. And there's a little bit of an inverse relationship here with the conversation we had about the quarterbacks, where you need X number of snaps as a quarterback, because that the more you have, the better you better position you are. As a running back, every time you're not running in a no contact jersey in the spring, and you're certainly not running in a no contact jersey during the fall. So you're going to get hit. And the tread on the tires conversation, the more you get hit, your body has a certain number of hits it can take. And at some point, then you start to sort of see a real physical toll. Once a guy's been in college a couple of years, he's going to be smart enough to recognize, like, hey, this is what I feel like at the end of the year. If I felt better and I had fewer hits, not only is that going to position me better to be successful at the end of the year, it's also going to position me better to be in the NFL and be viewed as someone with a longer potential career. So I don't think that's a hard conversation at all, because, you come in idealistic on day one and it's like, I'm going to be the bell cow running back for 3 years, and then I'm going to be the number 1 draft pick and it's going to be great. And then you get hit by, the 320-pound nose tackles in the SEC for 2 years. And it's like, you know what? If that happened a little bit less, that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. So I think you can kind of have a very honest conversation with them, that, with someone like running back in particular, like, hey, you're going to come in, you're going to play. That's going to be, whether that's 10 carries or 15 carries or 18 carries or whatever per game, like, don't worry, you're going to get the ball. If you're healthy, you're going to get the ball. You've seen Ohio State spread the ball around quite a bit among running backs in the past. So again, you can just sort of point to that and go, look, this is how we do it. This is how we divide up the reps. This is how we divide up the carries. This is how you can expect to have things moving forward. And the fact that he's in Columbus tells you that, okay, he's on board with that.
The expectations of recruits, I like when they're like, for the next 3 to 4 years, I'll be taking my talents. I prefer the guys who are like, for the next 4 to 5 years, I'll be taking my talents. I'm like, oh, finally, a realist. You throw that 5th year in there, it's like, oh, wow, somebody has sat you down and talked to you, and you have listened and you have understood. I have not yet listened to today's morning show, Tom, so I'm not sure if you threw the quote, the clip in there of Seth McLaughlin, and I believe it is McLaughlin. He told us that before the thing, so I'm not sure if you were aware of that, Tom. I hope you mispronounced his name throughout the entire show. But I'm not sure if you heard the part where I asked him his reaction when Nick Saban told the team that he was retiring, and he's like, No, you idiot. I was already in the portal. I was like, oh, I'm sure is it just 15 minutes of that question and exchange, where it's like, no, I was already in the portal. I'm like, oh, that's right. My bad. I'm dumb. I'm sorry. It's been a long month. Forgive me.
Today's morning show was just Will Howard. We'll hear from Seth McLaughlin, and don't worry, I will make sure to include that. Maybe we'll loop it a couple times. I don't know. We'll make sure to include that one. But as you started asking that, I was like, didn't he in the portal? Like, he was in the portal very early, like day or so after the Rose Bowl. So yeah, that's all right. That's he's an interesting guy because he's another one of these people who, it's a very different thing. Listening to these guys come in as transfers, it's just such a different conversation than coming in as a true freshman. Because it's like, if you have played for Alabama for a couple of years, you started for Nick Saban for a couple of years, like you are not going to be drinking through a fire hose at Ohio State. Like the freshmen all say, oh boy, it's so overwhelming. I'm barely keeping my head above water. You're not overwhelmed. You're coming in and it's like, okay, I have been at a program like this. This isn't even like Vic Cutler coming in from Louisiana Monroe last year, where it's like, I've been a starter in the FBS level, but there's a significant gap between Louisiana Monroe and Ohio State. There was a significant gap for Tristan Gebbia between Oregon State and Ohio State last year. If you're someone like Seth McLaughlin, you have what's Kevin saying? Been to the fair and seen the bear. Like you have walked this out already. You have played at a very high level. And, the last season did not end in a great way for him, but he's been successful at this level enough that I think you can look at that and go, there's enough track record here that you figure he can figure it out and get himself back on track and be positioned to be a real significant contributor for this team this fall.
And of course, he was asked about the snapping issues that showed up against Michigan. And he said that's completely correctable. He said he's been a center since he was I think 7 years old. So it's something he's always done, and this is just a new thing that popped up, and he's not too concerned about it. I think a lot of that had to do with maybe the noise at that point, and there was some talk of maybe like a silent count that was impacting things, but you get that resolved. I thought it was interesting when he was talking about Justin Fry, sat him down and talked about your strengths, your weaknesses, what you can build on, and he also said that he can play guard if need be, and whatever it is they need him to play, he'll play. But it sure seems like we were talking to Ohio State's starting center. And I've talked to people who said he's very smart. He'll be able to pick anything up that you want him to, and that's what you want from your center. You want them to be smart. You want them to be athletic so they can pull and do things and handle different things. I know back in the day when we would talk to Greg Stadrawa, he'd always say the first thing he looks for in the center is the athleticism. That's one of the reasons they eventually went with Josh Myers there. But he seems to be confident that he's almost not dismissive of the snapping issues because they were real, but also that's not something it's not something that's going to hold him back this year. The last guy we need to talk about, Will Kacmarek, the tight end from Ohio, talked of his love of blocking and said that he believes that's something that can set him apart at the position. And I'm sure for Ohio State fans, blocking is not very sexy, but at the tight end position, it is necessary. It will help your running game. And for a lot of Buckeye fans, this would be music to their ears. I'm wondering, is he, Tom, the number one tight end, and is G. Scott the 1B in terms of he's the guy that gets flexed out, and you've got Will Kacmarek who is on the line? Is he the every down guy? Is he the run down guy? And where is Jelani Thurman in all of this? Because I do think we talked about it all the time, Tom. Tight end is a developmental position. Don't expect too much from Jelani Thurman, even though he lost his black stripe very quickly, was impressive in the spring, still redshirted, didn't play much, to give you an idea. So I don't think you should expect him to be outstanding in year two. But I'm interested to see how this shakes out, because is Will Kacmarek the more complete guy, or is he the Luke Farrell to G. Scott's Jeremy Ruckert?
That's going to be such an interesting question to watch sort of play out during the course of the spring, because Kacmarek obviously, said himself, coming in, loves to block. That's sort of where it feels like he's coming in to be the strongest blocker on the team. He's also a competent receiver. It's not like he's never caught a pass and he's just a like a Stegosaurus in there on the end of the line. He had 20 catches, I think, in each of the last 2 years. It was like 20 catches and 200 yards, give or take, in each of the last couple of years. So he can be a receiving threat for them. G. Scott's probably a little more developed as a receiver and probably a little bit better as a receiver. And then Jelani Thurman is just sort of the, shiny, what could he possibly be? Probably the third strongest blocker, but, might end up being the strongest receiver of the group before all is said and done. And then it just becomes a matter of, I don't know if there's a 1, 2, 3 as much as there is something of a situational where you can't just, Will Kazmarek is only going to play during running plays and G. Scott's only going to play during passing plays because Will Kazmarek's a better blocker and G. Scott's a better receiver. You can't do that, obviously, because then that, it doesn't take defensive coordinators all that long to pick up on something like that. But you can use people a little more situationally where, they didn't really ever replace the Mitch Rossi role. So maybe Will Kazmarek takes on a little bit more of the Mitch Rossi role and you have G. Scott flexed out and Kazmarek's in the backfield as a fullback or something like that. Because last year they just kind of shuffled a bunch of guys in and out in that spot. And it was Caden Curry at one point and they had Caden McDonald at one point and they had, you had a bunch of different guys sort of shuffling through that position. I don't think they ever found someone that they were like, yes, this guy is exactly what we need. You maybe have that in Kazmarek. It just feels like an opportunity you have a bunch of different guys who can do a bunch of different stuff and you can just try and take advantage of, their individual best skills rather than going, number 1, number 2, number 3.
Been trying to watch some Ohio football on YouTube, watch some Will Kazmarek. From what I could tell, first of all, there's not a lot of Ohio Bobcat football on YouTube from the last couple of years. If I'm looking for specific games where he had like 2 or 3 catches, but from a little bit of what I've noticed, he's kind of been like that second guy. I think that was 2022 when he was a redshirt freshman. And just looking back a few years ago, Luke Farrell did have 20 catches in 2018, but that's when they were throwing the ball 1,000 times a game. Then he had 7 the next year with Justin Fields. But overall, very good haul. We'll see what they look like on the field. I'm not sure that there shouldn't be any reason to have high expectations. Obviously, Will Howard, we'll see. He is ultimately very confident in his abilities. And just as all of these guys are, you wouldn't be confident in your abilities. You wouldn't be at Ohio State. You wouldn't transfer to Ohio State if you're like, I don't know if I can do it. Although, unless you're coming from Louisiana Monroe, when you're like, this is a chance to go and to get out of Louisiana Monroe, like Victor Cutler did, and come to Ohio State. Even if you're never going to play, you still got to experience life with unlimited scholarship money and all the lunches you can eat and take home, which was unlike the stuff we had at Louisiana Monroe. But overall, Tom, are these 5 starters for Ohio State? Is there anybody like, even because Will Kazmarek, I think, is the question mark, and Quinshon Judkins, it's 1A, 1B. Like, do you even consider that? We know Bill O'Brien, we know Ryan Day both love the 12 personnel. So to me, even if Quinshon Judkins doesn't start a game or Will Kazmarek doesn't start a game, I think they're going to play as much as starters. And so this feels like this is the kind of haul that they wanted last year, where you're bringing in only starters, and that's what they've done. Now maybe in the spring they'll bring in some more guys as depth, but look at the guys last year that they brought in that really didn't play at times. So I don't see that happening with this group at all.
No, so far, I think you look at this group, and if any of them were healthy and played fewer than 40% of the snaps at their position this year, I'd be pretty surprised. I think, Quinshon Judkins, you're going to be splitting carries with Travion Henderson and Dallin Hayden, and, you will have blowout games where you're not playing every snap. So, 40, 50% of the snaps there, yeah, I think that's pretty safe. Will Kazmarek, I think you're going to, again, sometimes you're going to go, you're only going to play 1 tight end. Sometimes you're going to play 2 tight ends. Sometimes, they every once in a while will go with no tight end. You're probably going to see him out there as often as anyone else. So I think you're probably in that group as well. Caleb Downs, yeah, I'm expecting him to start. Seth McLaughlin at this point, yeah, I'm expecting him to start. And Will Howard, I think you bring him in because you think he can start. And They will have a competition this spring. We'll see how it goes. I think I would view Will Howard as the favorite to win that competition right now. I'd be a little surprised if it wasn't Will Howard as taking those first snaps for Ohio State this fall. But yeah, if these guys, if all 5 of these guys are healthy, I think you're getting like real meaningful minutes and snaps out of all 5 of them.
I would agree with you there. So that will do it. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Please go ahead and hit that thumbs up on YouTube if you have not yet done it. We would appreciate that. And of course, you can always find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Become a member. Find us on the message board there. Check out the content behind the paywall as well. We always welcome you over there. And of course, if you are listening to this via your podcast platform of choice, a 5-star rating and review, it would be greatly appreciated. So thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you guys later.